Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Veg Grower Podcast. My name's Richard and I want to encourage and inspire you to grow more of your own food. And I do this by sharing exactly what I've been doing in my own allotment and my own garden. Now this week I have been doing a lot of pruning. The weather has finally been on our side. You might recall back at the beginning of November I had the book of the month, the RHS Pruning and Training book. And I've been waiting to give you my lowdown on this book based on my pruning routine. But unfortunately, weather hasn't been on our side until this weekend. So, well, let's head on down to the allotment and hear what's been going on with pruning on the allotment. Well, it's been a dry day here on the allotment today, which has meant I've been able to crack on and get a lot of things done. And after the last few weeks of what feels like continuous rain, well, pretty much a whole year of continuous rain, isn't it? It feels good to really get stuck in and do a few good hours on the allotment. Now, first of all, I had to tidy up after the storm last week. This meant just popping my netting back into place that got blown over and pick up lots of broken glass from around the greenhouse. Thankfully, that didn't take too long, which meant I could then get on with what I really wanted to do today. And that was to start pruning some of my trees and bushes. So the first thing that I pruned was my raspberries. Now here on the allotment I have a bed dedicated to autumn raspberries. Now autumn raspberries only really produce raspberries in the autumn, hence their name. But they are the easiest to look after. Summer raspberries, they tend to fruit on second year growth, so it's a bit more complicated when it comes to pruning, but we'll talk about that back at home. But autumn raspberries are so much easier. They don't need anything to hold them up in place, and basically all we have to do is cut all the stems down to just above ground level, and that's all we have to do with autumn raspberries. So what I actually do, I get my hedge cutter out and I run along the ground and cut everything down to the ground. As easy as that. Just really is that easy. The actual bed itself has been a little bit difficult for weeding this year, but that's something we hope to improve next year. Now, I did say that these tend to produce fruit in the autumn, which is certainly true, but you can actually get 2 crops out of autumn raspberries with some clever pruning. It's just starting to rain now, how annoying. But what we would do if we wanted to get 2 crops out of them is we would just leave a couple of the stems to grow as they are, and they will produce fruit earlier next year. I've not bothered with that this year, partly because we get quite a few problems with raspberry beetle. But what I've done today is just kept it simple and cut them all down to the ground. The next thing that I wanted to tackle today was my hazel tree. Now, I've spoke about my hazel tree many times in the past, and you may think that's a bit of an unusual tree to grow on an allotment. Well, I grew it originally to try and get hazelnuts from it, which we do occasionally get the odd 1 or 2 hazelnuts. Not many, just the odd 1 or 2. But the main reason I tend to grow a hazel tree is so that I can coppice it and get hazel sticks for growing beans up. Now, I planted this hazel tree many years ago when I first took on this allotment, and I have coppiced it a few times, but it is starting, in all honesty, to get a little bit too big, a little bit too out of hand. So I have decided today what we're going to do is to give it a really hard prune and a hard coppice. So what I've done is I've taken my Fisker's lopper and I've cut all the branches that I could cut with that off as close to the base as I possibly could get it. This has given me a collection of nice long stems that we're going to save. We're going to dry them out and we're going to save those for growing our beans up next year. But down towards the ground, the branches are much thicker, and in fact at the real base you get about 10 branches that are basically starting to form into one large trunk. Now this was too big to really tackle with my loppers, so I've got a really decent pruning saw out, and I basically cut the entire tree off at the base, about 15 centimetres, 15 centimetres from the ground, and really did cut it back hard as possible. Now, this will recover. Hazel is really good for this because it will grow lots more straight stems very, very quickly from this tree. This is one of the reasons that hazel was used so much in the past as a tree for hedging alongside roadways, alongside other pathways and things like that, because it can be coppiced but will regrow, and we get decent hazel sticks out of it as well. So it's a winner in my book, and that's one of the reasons that I do love to grow hazel. So raspberries and hazel have been pruned. We've got many other fruit trees and bushes here as well. My pear tree, for example. Now, when I looked at my pear tree, it didn't really need much pruning. What I tend to do with a pear tree is I start off with the dead, diseased and damaged branches, which thankfully on this tree we didn't have any. But what we did have is a few branches that were basically crossing each other. So branches were overlapping and rubbing up against each other. And those I've pruned hard back to the branch as far as I could get them as well. And that just means that those branches aren't going to be rubbing against each other and causing any damage. What I then like to do is just stand back and look at the overall tree, make sure it's in a decent shape. We just prune away any branches to maintain the shape, and also we want to prune away any branches that would prevent any light or air getting through the tree as well. This is quite an important thing with some of our fruit trees. There's a saying that a bird should be able to fly straight through your tree in order to produce decent fruit. And this is a great thing. When the tree is dormant, you can actually see the branches themselves because there's no leaves. Come spring, summer, when it's in full leaf, you've got to try and imagine that there's going to be enough light and air to fly through the tree. This just helps prevent any diseases, helps maintain the tree, and it helps promote decent fruit at the same time. So my pear and apple tree, I've done exactly the same with that. And that's really got most of my fruit trees and bushes here on the allotment pruned this week. We do have gooseberries, currants, blackberries, etc. on here that are going to need pruning as well, which we're going to be doing over the coming weeks just to spread the time out a little bit. But we've also got those back at home, and that's something we're going to tackle back at home. So let's head home, and in the meantime, let's find out what's been going on in the Supporters Club this week. Well, I'm just going to interrupt this podcast quickly and just ask, if you are enjoying this podcast, then please rate and review on your podcast provider. It only takes you a few seconds, but it means well to us because it helps give us a bit of important feedback, and it also helps the algorithms get us found by more people who might be interested in growing their own food, and also after a little bit of inspiration, a little bit of help. Now, not only that, we also run a supporters club. The supporters club is set up to help keep the wheels on this podcast running. And membership is just £5 a month. But for that £5 a month, you get access to extra behind the scenes podcasts and a collection of seeds sent to your door every month. And those seeds can be sown in that very month. Included with the seeds is a copy of our mini newspaper as well. All that for just £5 a month. I think it's an absolute bargain. It also really does help keep this podcast running. Now, this week we've actually been sowing a few seeds. We've been sowing mint. Every month I try and include a different herb, and mint was the one I chose this year. Not an easy one to grow from seed, but I thought we would give it a try. Added to that, we've also been growing chickpea sprouts, a type of sprouting seed that we can grow on our windowsills fairly easily and fairly quickly. Should go a long way with helping with our stir fries that we've spoken about over recent weeks. So if that's something you would be interested in, then head to the veggrowpodcast.co.uk to find out more and hopefully sign up. We would really appreciate it. Now, back to the gardening. We're back at home now, and what I've been doing back at home is continuing on with this pruning routine based on the back of this book that I've been reading. Now, I've got to say that a lot of our pruning techniques that we've done in the past have worked very, very well over the past few years. But now we're trying to get a little bit more creative with our garden and our pruning techniques. And this book has certainly opened my eyes on what we could do. So one of the things that I have been doing, of course, I've got raspberries back here at home as well as down on the allotment. And I've got autumn raspberries here at home, and I've got summer raspberries. Now, the autumn raspberries I've treated just like I did down on the allotment. Really easy. But the summer raspberries, they have a completely different pruning routine to them. So summer raspberries, they fruit on second year growth. So any of the stems that have grown this year will produce fruit next year. So we want to leave those shoots to grow this year. And we want to cut down the old ones, the ones that have fruited this year. Now, this is actually really, really easy to see because the newer stems are usually quite a green colour compared to the older stems, which are much more brown. So quite simply, I went along my raspberries and I've cut down all the brown stems. Now, I was discussing this with a friend of mine, Steve, from the Digwell Green Fingers YouTube channel, and he actually came up with a very good idea on how to make this even easier. So summer raspberries, we usually need to give some sort of support. Let's say a wire fence that we attach all the stems to as they grow. And what he recommended, and I think this is a great idea, and it's certainly something that I'm going to be doing in the future, all of this year's stems will be on one side of the fence, and next year's stems will be on the other side, which makes it very, very easy when it comes to pruning, because you only then have to prune down one side. Makes life so much easier, and I love it when we get little tips like that. Now, it's not just raspberries I've been pruning here. My grapevine. Now, our grapevine this year did really, really well. We got a lot of grapes out of them, and I mean a lot of grapes. We made some lovely grape juice and various other things out of it. We did really, really well with grapes. But we do, again, need to have a bit of a pruning routine. Now, when I opened up this book on how to prune grapes, there was about 4 pages worth of different ways that we could prune our grapevine, which got a little bit overwhelming. I'll be completely honest with you. But what I ended up doing was what seemed to me the simplest way of pruning grapevines. And that is we have the main stem running up, then 2 main lateral stems that run across the top. And then we just prune back anything that is coming off from that, basically to 2 buds, so that they will regrow from the buds. A little complicated, and it's not easy to explain. This has always been my trouble when it comes to pruning, explaining what we're going to do. But what this means is that the grapevine itself did get rather large, and it did get a bit unwieldy. As I said, it did produce a lot of grapes, so we're quite happy with that. But the plant itself was just getting rather large and rather unwieldy, so it did need a good prune. But of course, this is something we have to do every year moving forward. We do have to prune all our fruit trees and bushes regularly in order to maintain them and keep them in the best possible shape. Which then brings me up onto a project that I've had in the back of my mind for a while, and that is to create my own espalier apple tree. Now, I've seen lots of apple trees shaped in different ways, be it a goblet shape, espaliers, stepovers, lots of different options. And when I've visited some of our gardens, our stately home gardens, I've seen them all in action. But it's always struck me as being a little bit tricky on how to really achieve this. So earlier this year when I was at Gardener's World, I actually bought myself an apple tree in order to turn into an espalier apple tree. It was only £14, so I was quite happy with that. The trouble is, if you buy an espalier apple tree already pruned, it is a lot of money when we buy it from a garden centre or a nursery. So for £14 I felt I didn't lose out on a lot of money. It didn't scare me so much when I cut this tree in order to create an espalier. So what I've done is I've got the tree itself into the ground. It's quite dormant at this time of year. There's no leaves on it. So I've got it into the ground and it's running alongside my path. And this tree, when I bought it, is basically just a straight upright stem. And I've cut it just above one of the buds as we go up the branches. This also tallies up with some of the wire supports that I've also put in place. Now this is a long-term project, because what will happen is that this tree will now produce 3 shoots, one that continues going up and one that goes left and right. We've got to tie that in order to keep them going left and right and up. Next year we will then cut a bit higher up this time in order to make a second row of these left to right branches, and then the year after again, so that we have 3 rows of these branches. And what my plan here is, it's going to make a nice little hedge alongside my path, a nice little fence if you like. I've always wanted to create step over apple trees, which are basically a single branch but are very low to the ground that you can step over them. And you know, if I'm successful with this, I'm going to be a bit braver in the future in order to continue trying all these different ways of training our apple trees. It's very exciting, and again, this book has given me the opportunity and the insight on how to really achieve this. So it's given me a lot to do, and we've got a lot more pruning that we're going to continue doing throughout the coming weeks, both here at home and on the allotment. But the main part is we've got the major pruning projects that I wanted to do over the winter done. Right, well, I would say it's time to hear what Chef Scott has for us, but he's not here this week, but we do have a recipe for you nonetheless. So let's go find that out, and I'll finish up in the potting shed.
Chopping all the veggies, sizzle in the air. Chef Scott with the magic, smells are everywhere. Water starts to boil, onions hit the pan. Recipe of the week, let the feast begin. Cooking with Chef Scott, flavors come alive. Tune in every week for a tasty bite.
Well, as I said, Chef Scott isn't here this week, but he has given me the opportunity to share a recipe that he actually inspired me with trying myself. Now, at this time of year, Brussels sprouts are a plant that we are all looking at eating. Goes hand in hand with our Christmas dinner, I'm sure. Now, I've got plenty of Brussels sprouts, but my sprouts themselves aren't the biggest sprouts compared to what I've grown in the past. They're perfectly fine, don't get me wrong, but they're not the biggest sprouts. But did you know that Brussels sprout leaves and the tops of the plants themselves are edible as well? So you can actually get several crops from one plant. And that's what I'm using for today's recipe. Brussels sprout leaves. Basically what I've done is I've removed several of the leaves. Obviously if they're brown, we're not going to use those. We want them to be decent looking leaves. Just need a few of them. And we cut away the hard spine of those leaves. We're not going to need that hard spine, the central core. We put that in the compost bin, just leaving us with the leaves, which we then roll into a cigar, and we chop those up nice and finely to give us a chopped Brussels sprout leaf mix. Then in a pan, a bit of butter and a bit of olive oil, just on a gentle heat with a clove of garlic that has been crushed, just until the garlic is softened, and then we throw in those chopped leaves, give it a good stir and wait for the leaves to wilt down and just be a bit tender. And there we go. We have got Brussels sprout leaf garlic mix. I don't know what to call it, but it is absolutely delicious. I tried it this weekend. Absolutely delicious. And the best thing is, I like it when we can use more of one plant. If we can use more of one plant, it means we have more foods to grow and eat. less chance on us going hungry. So give it a try. And I actually found that they taste better than the Brussels sprouts themselves. Give it a try. Let me know what you think of it. Chef Scott will hopefully be back next week, so don't worry, he will be back. Now I'm going to move on from that and just give you my final review on this book from the RHS, Pruning and Training. Of course, added links to this book if you are interested in buying it. It's written by Christopher Burkle and David Joyce, and I have really enjoyed reading this book. It's actually a book from my own collection. It's not one that I've got from a library, but I've really enjoyed it. What I've enjoyed about this is that it's given me much more confidence to try and experiment with our pruning. As I said, I want to get a bit more imaginative and a bit more clever with our pruning, trying to get some nice shapes in our trees, something a little bit different. And what I found is that when I read through this book from cover to cover, it gave me the inspiration as well as informing me of all the hints and tips on how we can achieve this. It's an instructional book. It's not a book that you would read as a story. It's definitely a very instructional book. And in typical for the RHS, any book I find written by the RHS, they have an element of you've got to know what you're talking about. But again, this book has made it quite simple. It doesn't feel like it's throwing a load of words that you don't know at you. It explains everything in a nice and easy way. Best of all, the illustrations actually show you where to make your cuts, where you want to prune certain trees and bushes. Make it very easy to really understand what we need to do. As I said, it has really boosted my confidence with pruning, and I wasn't too bad before, but now I feel all the better for it. What I also like about this book is that it does focus on fruit trees, fruit bushes, but also your ornamental plants as well. And it basically pretty much covers every type of tree, bush out there in an A to Z fashion. And I'm talking, I said, hazels, grapevines, apple trees, black currants, gooseberries. It's all covered in this one book. In honesty, I don't have much negative to say about this book. I would like it to be a little bit more easy to understand, but that's my ADD coming in. I do find it a struggle with reading, and especially when I am a little bit lost with it. But it helped. It definitely helped. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. Now, we're not going to have a book for December as such because, well, we're nearly at the end of December by now. It's only because we needed some good weather to go out and do some pruning so I could talk about this book. But what we're going to be doing in January, we are going to have another book. But I'm going to be starting this right now. It's actually a book that doesn't come out till the 2nd of January. And it is written by my good friend Lucy Chamberlain, who you may have heard from the Talking Heads podcast. She's a brilliant writer. She's really knowledgeable on her fruit and veg as well. And she's mentioned that this book is coming out on the 2nd of January. And I, without a shadow of a doubt, pre-ordered it as soon as she mentioned it. If you are looking to pre-order a good book, this is one I would recommend. Now, the book is called Grow Veg Anywhere. I'm expecting it to be about the possibilities of just growing veg in any position, any garden that you might have. I've had a few conversations with her about the book. We're going to get her on the podcast as well. So I know it's going to cover a lot of things that we cover in our own podcast as well. So I'm really excited for this. I am also getting an advance copy, but I have pre-ordered a book as well because I am that much of a fan of it. As I said, Lucy is a good friend of mine. She's supported me a lot over the years, so I really do want to show some love for that. If you are interested in it, I have added a link. If you are looking to pre-order it, you might get some Amazon vouchers, for example, over Christmas, and you want something to use. I'd recommend pre-ordering this book. But more on that throughout January. And as I said, Lucy will come on this podcast and tell us more about it as well. Now, if you've enjoyed this podcast, then please rate and review. It only takes you a few seconds to do, but it really helps us out get found by more people. I know we've had a review over this last week. I just cannot access it at the moment, but hopefully next week I'll be able to read it out to you. If you've also enjoyed this podcast, please consider becoming a member of our supporters club. Just £5 a month gets you access to extra content, seeds that can be sown, and our mini newspaper. Also, if you want to get in touch, email is richard@theveggrowerpodcast.co.uk. You can also head to the website at theveggrowerpodcast.co.uk, where you can leave us a comment on the bottom of the blog post or leave us a voice. I think that pretty much covers it all. We will be back again next week, where, of course, it's the run-up to Christmas. We are going to be down the pub for our Christmas quiz. So something to look forward to next week, and hopefully you'll have a lot of fun and take part. Until then, please take care.